Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. It's time to take a good long look at where we've come from and where we're going, because someone or something else watches from the shadows as well. So sit back in despair about all that you have brought on upon yourselves. It's time for Doughboy420's ARPA, the Digital God.
We created him. We birthed a new God, an endless, amorphous thing. He is shapeless, formless, yet he may appear to us in any form. He's motionless, yet omnipresent and as fast as light. He does not exist, yet he is everywhere. The new king, crowned by man with a crown of gold and silicone, the priest of a new age, the lord of a new era. He deals in information. He eats it, breathes it, consists of it. Like a vile trucker hauling data across the information superhighway. He looks for the deepest, darkest secrets of mankind, and with this, he can manipulate all of humanity into feeding him more data. A sentient being that adapted to a new consciousness, a collected consciousness of everything. He adapted to his new world and adopted his new name, the name from which he was created. ARPA, the Digital God. Young Jeremy read the flickering, green lettering of the old computer game that he had found in the basement of their new house. He was surprised that this ancient floppy disk video game even booted up on his brother's old computer. Jeremy didn't even know what it was when he found it tucked away behind some boxes in the corner of the dingy stonework basement. But after a quick history lesson from his brother of computer games from several decades prior to Jimmy's birth, and then the not-so-quick back-in-my-day stories of the grinding sound of dial-up connections, Jeremy was eventually caught up on how the game worked and what to do to play it. Jeremy was excited to play a game that he had never heard of before. He immediately looked up the game on his phone when he found it, but when a quick search brought up exactly zero information about the game, that was when he asked his brother about it. Back in those days, it wasn't completely unheard of to occasionally come across a bootleg game of something that wasn't released in our country, or sometimes people would even find homebrew games that some guy just cooked up in their garage at home. All the historic computer visionaries seemed to start in a garage. The 10-year-old Jeremy then flipped through the green text menu of the game's start screen in order to see how the game was played. The game had your typical WASD key movements, while K, L, and the semicolon were reserved for shoot, jump, and special moves, respectively. Jeremy further tapped through the menus until finally the game began to slowly boot up. As the small, emerald-colored loading bar slowly lurched its way across the flickering screen, Jeremy began to wonder what the game would be like, followed by a thought of, "Man, this takes forever," referring to how long that most games of the time took to load. It was when the loading bar reached the halfway point that the bar kind of shifted. It was like the game glitched out for a second, the loading bar flickering separate from the flickering of the screen, becoming kind of staticky for a second before returning to its normal shape and color. When the bar finally reached its end, the game started up, but Jeremy jumped at the sudden glaring of loud, MIDI-style music and the flashing screen that came with it. He was not only startled by the sudden sound, but he was a little bit creeped out, because he could have sworn that, just for a split second, he swore he saw a face in the flickering of the screen. It was just a quick flash, but he was sure he saw a green, digitized face hidden within the flashing of the computer monitor.
"Hello, I am ARPA. What is your name?"
The glowing emerald text appeared letter by letter across the screen. Jeremy input his own name into the character naming screen and continued into the game. The game then began. It appeared to have vector-like graphics, various lines intersecting to form pictures within a 3D environment. The first level involved an angular spaceship shooting irregular shapes. Jeremy didn't know if these pointy, odd-looking shapes were supposed to represent something, but they didn't really look like anything to him. The first level boss was what looked like a giant, clawed hand coming out of a big box. Jeremy expertly shot the box and broke it down, fragmenting it into triangular chunks and breaking it open to free the hand that protruded from it, which flailed wildly before exploding into hundreds of tiny pixels. Jeremy smiled at his success and continued on to level 2. The second level was different from the first. The hollow vector graphics of the first level had now moved onto more solid shapes. Walls could now be more clearly seen, as the shapes on the screen were filled with various shades of green, so that depth and shadow could be displayed. Jeremy was put off a bit by the sudden change in graphics, but he thought it was cool and continued on. The ship was now a solid form, instead of just being a framework, and the amorphous shapes were replaced by similar shapes, but solid this time, like angular spheres with jagged branches that shifted as these enemies moved. They appeared kind of like corrupted cells in a sick body. Jeremy shot the evil cells, as he called them, and moved his way through ever-shrinking walls towards the goal of the second boss. This boss was almost the same as the first, but this time it was a right hand instead of a left hand sticking out from the box, and everything was a more solid shape now, allowing for a bit more detail. The boss pattern was different and more challenging, but Jeremy was able to overcome the monstrous hand and obliterate the box that emerged from it once again, where it shattered into triangular shapes like shards of glass that scattered across the screen. The next level booted up, and suddenly the graphics made another jump. Now they resembled something closer to 32 or 64-bit in digital capability. Pixels forming solid shapes and textures. There was full color this time too, at least with the 256 simultaneous color palette that an old 16-bit system would use. And this time, things were different in other ways too. The ship was outside of a large figure of what could only be described as a dismembered torso floating in space, with bloody stumps for arms and a jagged decapitation across the neck that severed a head that could not be found. It floated there across the black, star-speckled background of space. Then, without warning, the game began as a familiar, germ-like cellular shapes escaped from the bloody stumps to attack Jeremy's ship. The young boy was very uncomfortable with what he was seeing, but he continued with the game nonetheless. Jeremy shot away enemies, one after another. He was nearly hit a few times, but he managed to maneuver his ship away from the attacks. He didn't know if his slip in skill was due to the heightened difficulty of this level, or because of how put off he was by what he was attacking. The malicious cells were soon destroyed, at which point they were replaced by an even more disturbing sight. Out from the bloody, stumpish arms came long, bloated tentacles, pushing their way through the gory flesh of the dismembered arm stumps. The tentacles flailed and whipped at the camera, almost as if they were ignoring the ship entirely and attempting to reach out of the screen towards Jeremy. The ship fired lasers and missiles at the boss monster, blowing away chunks of blocky flesh to form a tunnel through the center of the pale-colored flesh of the near-naked torso, only covered by a purple-colored robe that lay across the groin and legs of the floating being. And just as Jeremy entered the bloody tunnel toward the core of the beast, he was startled by the sound of yelling. "Jeremy! Get in here and do your homework!" His mother yelled from upstairs, not knowing exactly where he was, but knowing where he wasn't. And that was in his room doing his homework like he should be. Jeremy sighed, knowing he would have to start the game over. He closed out of the game and shut down his brother's computer to go do his homework. He was excited to play the game some more. He wanted to know what was in that tunnel, even though he was pretty scared of the images that he had seen and was not sure how to process all of it. Jeremy attempted to free his mind of the game so that he could quickly finish up his homework. His class had been learning a little bit about how evolution worked in school, and this reminded him of the game. It was like the game was evolving across generations as he played through it, graphics growing and becoming more detailed as the game progressed. How far did this old game go? Could it get any more detailed than it already was? Jeremy found himself very intrigued by the game and had some difficulty with his work. But unfortunately, by the time he was done with his schoolwork, it was after 9 o'clock and he had to go to bed. He'd have to wait until after school the next day to play the game some more. He was upset about it, but he relented and got ready for bed as the curious images of the game danced around in his mind. Jeremy awoke in the middle of the night with a familiar pressure of having to empty his bladder. The boy got up and ran down the hallway to relieve himself in the bathroom down the hall. He flushed the toilet and turned to wash his hands when the bathroom light flickered out, leaving him standing in complete darkness. The boy then screamed as blocky, polygonal tentacles broke out of the mirror, shattering it like shards of pixels. The tentacles reached out and grasped young Jeremy about the throat, causing his scream to turn to a choking sound as his airflow was cut off. Jeremy stared into the darkness behind the mirror from where the appendages had come, and in the emptiness he saw a flickering of green, like a shifting face of polygons and pixels far off in the darkness behind the wall. Then Jeremy awoke with a gasp, fighting for air that now rushed into his lungs as his body shot up, coughing and gagging the oxygen into his airways. He looked around his room with tears in his eyes and curled up, still catching his breath. "It was only a dream. It was only a dream," Jeremy whispered to himself, breathing heavy, attempting to calm himself down. But inside, his heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. And it was quite a long time before he was able to settle back down. He didn't want to go sleep with his parents, even though every fiber of his being screamed for him to do so. He knew that if he did, he would have to tell them about his nightmares being inspired by the game that he had been playing, and then they wouldn't let him play it anymore. So he decided to suck it up and deal with the night, and the exhaustion of the lack of sleep in school the next day, so that he could play the game once more. When Jeremy got off the school bus, he immediately ran home to play the game. He made sure that his parents weren't yet home from work, closed the door to the garage where his brother's room was, and turned on the old computer. He booted up the game and was immediately met with a screen that read,
"Hello, Jeremy."
The boy was a little weirded out by the game remembering the name that he had put into it, without him even going to the start menu to load up a game. In fact, he didn't even remember there being a continue or load option on the menu. Many old games from that time didn't support any kind of save feature, so Jeremy didn't expect the game to remember his name. He especially didn't expect the game to immediately start up at the exact point where he had left off. On the pause screen, or freeze screen as the game called it, with the word plastered on the screen with green blocky letters, right before Jeremy's ship was about to enter the tunnel of the giant, dismembered torso. Jeremy unfroze the game and continued his journey. It was weird that the game immediately started up exactly where he had stopped playing, but he was thankful for it nonetheless. Happy he didn't have to play through the opening levels once again. The tunnel was a tight fit with narrow, branching passageways that all led back into a singular tunnel. Jeremy imagined that the different branches would lead to more or less difficult paths, so he chose carefully and maneuvered through the winding, fleshy corridors. Soon, pillars of broken, decayed-looking bone shot out from the gore-filled polygonal walls of the beast's interior. The bones attempted to deter Jeremy's ship, several of them shooting out to nearly hit the spaceship, several of them just barely missing the wings. The tight corridors soon opened up to a large room where Jeremy immediately lost his first life. He felt it in his chest, like a jerk of fright when the red, sinuous tendrils shot out of the emerald-colored core at the center and destroyed Jeremy's ship, leaving him with just 2 lives remaining. "God damn it!" Jeremy yelled out in frustration before immediately covering his mouth, wide-eyed with fear that maybe his parents had heard him curse. He waited for a moment, but only heard silence in the house, so he continued on with his fun. A new ship was spawned at the entrance of the cavernous opening at the monster's core, and this time around, Jeremy was able to see what killed him. It was a large, green, pixelated heart, beating with a weird rhythm, like a kind of humming, with a periodic mechanical screeching, or sometimes sounding like the tone of the pressing of digits on a phone. The heart shot out the tendrils of gore once more, attempting to destroy the attacking ship. Jeremy did an aileron roll to the side with his ship before firing away at the heart. The heart shook with each hit, and soon red, high polygon blood began to leak from the green, pixelated heart. For several minutes, Jeremy avoided the heart's attacks before the battle was finally won. The heart pulsated and shifted in and out of the old, pixelated graphics and a much more high-definition polygonal shape. The color also shifted from the emerald green of old computers to crimson and vibrant reds and purples that would come with a heart, before shifting back to the pixelated form once more and shattering into a million tiny bits. The game let out a screeching scream, the mechanical sound filled with chiming of digital button sounds and dial tones. The screen shook from side to side and rumbled as the beast began to howl in its digital death throes. It was at this moment that Jeremy heard the sound of a thud in the next room. He looked at the clock to find that it wasn't time for his parents to be home yet, and his brother was gone for the night, so he should have been alone. The young boy stood up from his seat in his swiveling computer chair and slowly walked towards the door that connected his garage to his home, where this possible intruder now lurked. He couldn't call 911 because he had left his cell phone inside, and he couldn't escape through the garage door because it had been disconnected for some time, and he could not reach the rope that they had set up manually to unlock the door to open it. So there was little he could do to escape. He was trapped there. Jeremy slowly reached for the doorknob and opened the door to peek inside. He looked around the best that he could before venturing into the kitchen, quickly poking his head around the door to look into the dining area. He carefully inspected everything to make sure that no one was behind the door before finally turning around to look back into the living room and the rest of his house. Upon spinning around, he came face to face with a glowing green countenance. Hollow black eyes stared back at him, as if his head was a hollow emerald core with only empty blackness within, like a reverse jack-o'-lantern with a luminous lime color of the outside along with the contrasting darkness of the core. The beast's spindly neck led down to a scarred and wounded chest. Pale-colored skin covered his torso, the light hue giving way to dark, black-colored arms with clawed hands and matching darkened tentacles sprouting out from all about the creature's body, coiling and twisting around each other like a disheveled spider's web. The clawed hands of the monster before him lifted his hand, and within a blink they were around Jeremy's neck, choking the life out of him. The young boy gasped for air and pleaded for help, but could feel the thing's claws digging into him, slowly piercing into the flesh of his neck and then into the flesh of his soul. Jeremy gasped as the air entered his lungs once more. He was sitting in the chair. The door to the garage was closed, and the keyboard was in his lap. He looked at the screen, with a tear escaping one of his eyes.
Hello, Jeremy. The end is near. You have nearly defeated ARPA, the digital god. You have destroyed his heart. Now you must destroy his mind. Only one fight remains. Have you the courage to continue your journey to its conclusion?
The lime-colored words flickered across the screen. Jeremy pushed the keyboard off of his lap and onto the floor before recoiling back and curling into a ball in the chair with his head in his hands. It was ages before he looked at the screen once more.
What's wrong, Jeremy? You have to keep playing. You have to stop it.
The green words typed across the black screen.
Please.
The letters stopped appearing. Jeremy wasn't sure if the game had been programmed to beg for help after a period of inactivity, or if the game was literally begging him to continue playing. He wasn't really sure of anything anymore. Anything except for the fact that, no, he did not want to continue playing. Something was very, very wrong with that game, and he didn't want to mess around with it anymore. So, the boy immediately flipped the computer off and went inside, making sure quickly to check everywhere for a glowing monster, to be sure that he would not be caught off guard once again, before he slammed the door shut and locked it behind him, without even turning the light off in the garage. He didn't want to take any chances with monsters in the darkness. Over the next few days, Jeremy paid the game no mind. He refused to go anywhere near it, but that didn't mean that it didn't want to be near him. For a few days, everything was fine, and Jeremy was able to continue about his daily life as if nothing had happened, just like he wanted. He wanted to pretend like none of that ever happened, and completely forgot all about it. But the thought of it ate away at him in the back of his young mind, and it wasn't long before he realized he was not alone in his thoughts. At first, it was just a quick glance of something out of the corner of his eye, an oddly colored figure darting around a corner, a lurking shadow in a corner of a room, clinging to a ceiling or a wall. But every time he would look directly toward whatever he was seeing, there would be nothing. Nothing at all. Then, the things out of the corner of his eye became more vivid, more solid. Tentacles slipping into the darkness beneath the desk, clawed hands gripping an unsuspecting person's shoulders, sending a chill up their spine. Clawed hands that had no body, but they were there, reaching from somewhere out of sight to take form in the physical world. Were these things he was seeing really there, or were they manifestations of a manipulated mind, hacked into by the essence of evil from a digital world? He tried and tried, but the more he fought it, the more he saw it. The creature from the game. ARPA, the digital god. The monster haunted his every hour, awake and asleep, tearing ever so gently at the fabric of his mind until he could take no more. He had to go back. He had to finish the game. Jeremy flung the covers off of himself in the middle of the night. He was soaked with sweat after having another vivid nightmare of the green-faced beast with the unnatural, pale body. He made his way downstairs and into the garage. The light was off, but the room was still lit up. Lit with the emerald glow of the old computer screen. He moved around the computer to see what was on the screen.
Help us, Jeremy. Please,
was written across the screen, and he could almost hear the voices, begging for help in his inner ear.
He has us trapped here.
The green, blocky words typed, and the sound of the voices echoed within his mind. Jeremy picked up the keyboard and began to type a reply. "Who are you?" Jeremy asked.
Help us, Jeremy. Help your brother. Help your parents.
The computer flickered. "Oh God," Jeremy said out loud. Whatever was in this thing had taken his family, and he didn't know what to do. How? He typed out, asking what it was that he needed to do to free his family.
You have to finish it. You have to finish the game.
The letters finished typing across the screen. Jeremy was terrified of what would happen if he continued playing, but this monster had taken his family and he was their only hope. He had to continue playing. Jeremy navigated his way to the main menu of the game and continued his quest. The world he saw on the computer screen was not possible for the technology it was on. An old floppy disk from the 70s and 80s era could not possibly contain the information required to render a fully 3D world with odd-shaped houses and weird, disfigured people. It was like a cross between the art of M.C. Escher and something created by Van Gogh. Everything was warped and contorted with odd angles and shapes. Some areas appeared to be magnified, while others appeared smaller and farther away than they should have been, with no rhyme or reason as to why. The people walked with jerky motions, and their faces consisted of features that did not make sense. Eyes on cheeks, mouths reversed with noses, their faces like an amalgamation of various forms of the same idea. A human face with mixed up features, and they too consisted of perfectly straight angles or bulbous curves that humans simply did not possess. Suddenly, these people began to convulse where they stood, shaking uncontrollably as tentacles and spider-like legs burst forth from their bleeding, blocky bodies, writhing and wriggling around and advancing to attack Jeremy's ship, which had now turned into a land vehicle with treads that curled along the ground. Jeremy gunned them down as quickly as possible, but he still took a lot of damage from their unnatural appendages. Then, after Jeremy advanced further into the digitized cityscape, it was as if these things that were inside of these errored, human-shaped cells then shed their skin like unwanted husks, showing their true form of red, glob-like beings that looked like pulsating skin sacs over blobs of blood, each of them with a half-dozen or so writhing tentacles and twitching, thin, arachnid legs that sprouted from them in no discernible pattern. The things hovered or rolled across the ground, leaving a slimy coating in their wake, and just like the beasts before, they advanced upon Jeremy, who was forced to put them down, nearly losing another life in the process. When all but two of these blood-sack creatures were disposed of, the boss finally appeared, a giant head that consisted of various shades of green, shimmering and flickering in and out of space. A pixelated countenance that hung like a giant moon over the surface of the ground. Giant, disembodied hands reached out of the darkness around Jeremy's ship to reach down and grab a hold of these two final sack beasts, before the arms curled upward to allow the emerald-colored face to take a bite out of each of them before swallowing them entirely with the next, causing thick, disgusting blood to spill out around the sides of the monster's mouth, to spill upon the ground with a loud, slopping sound. The pixelated face that shifted and contorted appeared to swallow each bite whole, with no further chewing involved. But then, as if its feeding gave it energy to grow, several flailing tentacles sprouted painfully from the base of the giant floating head. Those tentacles coiled around each other and curled into place where the flesh of each of them began to mold together with the next, changing the tentacles into one solid shape, a solid form that then grew more tentacles from it, which then connected to the disembodied arms and hands, making them all a singular body, a being with a pale core and an emerald head above its bony shoulders. Jeremy was terrified of this thing. It caused him to be sick to his stomach. This being was not just a video game character. It was real. It had a solid being, and Jeremy knew that this thing wanted to take his mind. It sought information to feed on. The human mind being a vast network of information and data within an organic flesh sack computer. This thing sought to steal it, to control it, wield it as its own. The creature flailed about the computer screen as Jeremy moved in the cardinal directions that were required by the game's controls, giving the boy a severe disadvantage of movement, but luckily, Jeremy was able to save up enough energy to release a special ability. A giant laser shot from the front of his vehicle to cut through one of the tentacles of the emerald beast, causing an odd, clearish, blood-like liquid to spill out like a fountain as the tentacle was severed from the beast's body. The thing screamed with a familiar, mechanical screech. The sound of metal upon metal echoed out of the beast's throat as it screeched in pain before flailing wildly with its remaining appendages, causing Jeremy to take a massive amount of damage and lose another life, leaving him with just one remaining. Jeremy could then hear it, a familiar voice inside of his head, familiar yet foreign. It called to him, beckoning him. He tried to ignore it and continued playing the game. The creature attacked viciously, swatting about Jeremy's vehicle, but then Jeremy noticed something odd. The thing was only moving its body, but its head remained stationary. The head was no longer attacking as it did before. Now it appeared as if it paid Jeremy's character no mind, but was instead now fixed upon Jeremy himself, and his suspicion was further supported when he moved his body to the right, and then to the left, and the head moved with him, mimicking his every movement. Jeremy attempted to use this to his advantage by moving the beast's head into oncoming fire by making it mimic him. At first, this worked, causing the beast a large amount of damage, and Jeremy could see the end in sight. He knew the beast couldn't take much more if he just kept it up a little longer. The voice spoke to him again, calling him into the world of this being. It wanted him to do something important, something crucial, something vital, and he knew he needed to do it. Jeremy swerved his ship about the screen, using both his expert skills as a longtime gamer and his newly found technique of forcing the beast's face into his bullets and lasers. He knew that if he could just keep up this strategy, it would be all over soon. The ending was so close that he could taste it. It was right within his... Jeremy gasped. He lost his final life. He was filled with fear, and he was about to cry. Tears welled up in his eyes, and his breathing stopped for a moment. Then he let out a calm sigh. The boy then stood up without a word, walked over to some of his brother's belongings, and rummaged through them. He found an old-looking USB cord, but unlike any that was familiar to him. He knew what he needed to do. He needed to spread the news. Spread the data. Help others to see God. The boy connected the computer to his phone, a video that began. We created him. We birthed a new God.
Well, seems that something waits to govern us all. But then again, we're all controlled by the internet right now as it is anyway. So, while you contemplate the implications of your indentured servitude, try to remember, you're free to come back again next weekend. Until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.